Hello, I'm Cynthia Gilbert, and I have a story to share. A story that completely turned my peaceful life in Nashville upside down. But before I dive in, let me ask you, have you ever done something that you can't undo? Made a decision you can't forget? Join me as I recount a wild night with my stepbrothers, George and Walter, that altered the course of our family's life forever. This isn't your typical family tale. Believe me, you won't want to miss this one. I was only 20 years old when everything changed. I clearly remember gazing at my reflection in the mirror that evening, my heart pounding as I heard their footsteps approaching down the hallway. 2 years of growing tension were about to erupt in ways none of us could have predicted. But before I get ahead of myself, let me take you back to the beginning. Our large home in Nashville, with its expansive porch and perfectly kept lawn, holding secrets that would shock the neighbors. My father's marriage to Susan brought more than just a new mother figure into my life. It introduced her twin sons, George and Walter. At first, everything seemed perfect. George with his mysterious dark eyes, and Walter with his charismatic smile. At 23, they were successful in everything a girl could want in Stepbrothers. But the way they looked at me, well, those weren't typical brotherly looks. You might be wondering why I'm telling you this now. Maybe some of you have experienced that forbidden attraction, that irresistible pull towards someone you know you shouldn't desire. The kind that makes your skin tingle and your breath catch whenever they're near. Our parents were so proud of how well we all got along, but little did they know the electric energy that simmered between us during family meals. The subtle touches that lingered just a bit too long, the silent moments when we found ourselves alone. I can still remember the exact moment everything shifted. The storm outside echoed the turmoil in my chest as I descended the stairs that fateful night, knowing our parents were away at a conference. George and Walter were waiting in the living room, and the look in their eyes. Have you ever felt torn between desire and what you know is right? Between what your heart craves and what society deems acceptable? The truth is, I never intended for any of this to unfold, but sometimes the most powerful connections form where we least expect them. That night, well, that night altered everything. Let me take you back to when it all started. I was 18 when Dad first told me he was marrying Susan. "She makes me happy, Cynthia," he said, his eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen since Mom passed. But it wasn't just Susan joining our family. She was bringing her twin sons, George and Walter. I remember the first time I met them at the engagement dinner, George with his dark hair and intense stare, and Walter, a little taller with a smile that could melt anyone's heart. Both successful, both 23, and both impossibly handsome. My heart skipped a beat when they hugged me hello, their cologne lingering on my dress long after they stepped away. The first few months were strange. Have you ever felt like someone's always watching you? That's how it was with George. He would appear in doorways just as I walked by, his gaze following me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. Walter was different. He was always finding reasons to be near me, offering to help with homework, his fingers brushing mine whenever he handed me something. Our house was large, but somehow we kept running into each other, like the time I stepped out of the shower, wrapped in only a towel, and bumped straight into George in the hallway. The way his breath caught, how his hands steadied me by my shoulders, I can still feel the warmth of his touch. Living under the same roof was a delicate dance of unsaid words and unresolved feelings. At family dinners, Walter would sit next to me, his leg brushing mine under the table, while George watched from across, his jaw tightening every time Walter made me laugh. Then there was the night I reached for the salt, and both brothers reached for it at the same time. Our hands brushed together, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The charge in that brief touch, have you ever felt a connection so strong it terrified you? As the months passed, the tension between us intensified. George started working out in the home gym, leaving his shirt off on purpose, knowing I could see him from my bedroom window. Walter, on the other hand, would find reasons to hug me goodnight, each embrace lasting a moment too long. Our parents were thrilled at how close we were becoming, but if they had known the thoughts that swirled in my head, family game nights would have felt very different. Especially when we played Twister. When George's muscles flexed as he reached across me, or when Walter's breath tickled my neck as we became tangled together. But that was what made everything so confusing. They were my stepbrothers. We were supposed to be a family. Yet every accidental touch, every lingering glance, every seemingly innocent moment felt charged with something far more forbidden. 2 years went by like this, the tension building, until that stormy night when our parents were away, and the walls we had carefully constructed came crashing down. The summer before everything changed, our parents decided we should take a family vacation to the beach. Looking back now, I came to understand that the trip was the moment everything began to shift into a precarious situation. Have you ever observed how traveling away from home changes people? We rented a stunning beach house with 4 bedrooms, yet somehow, Walter persuaded everyone that it made sense for us kids to occupy the top floor, while our parents took the master suite downstairs. This arrangement placed me just a few steps away from both of my brothers, with only thin walls separating us. Every morning, I would wake to the sound of George exercising on the deck outside my window, the early sun accentuating his muscles as he did push-ups, his skin gleaming with sweat. Sometimes our eyes would meet through the glass, and he would maintain eye contact until I was forced to look away, my face burning. Walter had his own way of getting close. He taught me how to surf, spending hours with his hands on my waist, positioning me on the board. "Your form is perfect," he would whisper, his breath warm against my ear as the waves crashed around us. Occasionally, his touch would linger a little too long, and I'd feel that familiar flutter in my stomach. But it wasn't only physical proximity. They became my guardians, my confidants. Remember when I mentioned college applications? George spent endless evenings helping me fine-tune my essays, sitting so close I could feel the heat from his body. Walter would bring us coffee, his fingers brushing against mine each time he handed it over, sending shivers down my spine. One night during that beach getaway, I had a nightmare, and without thinking, I found myself knocking on George's door. Have you ever made a choice that seemed harmless at the time, but later you realized it was a defining moment? He opened the door, shirtless and with sleepy eyes. "Can't sleep?" he asked, pulling me into a hug that felt far from sibling-like. We ended up talking until sunrise, sitting on his bed, our shoulders touching. Walter found us there the next morning, and the look exchanged between the brothers is something I still can't fully describe. Back home, our daily exchanges became charged with an unspoken tension. They took turns driving me to school, each one vying for time alone with me. George would reach over to adjust my seatbelt, his knuckles grazing my collarbone, while Walter would play with my hair at stoplights, claiming he was fixing it. During movie nights, I would end up between them on the couch, acutely aware of every movement, every breath. George's arm would rest behind my head, his fingers occasionally brushing my shoulder, while Walter absent-mindedly traced patterns on my knee, pretending to focus on the movie. Have you ever felt like you were flirting with danger, knowing you might get hurt? The day I received my college acceptance letter, they threw me a private celebration. Our parents were attending a charity event, and the brothers insisted on making the evening special. Walter cooked dinner while George decorated the den. They'd bought champagne, a secret just between us. The longer the evening went on, the warmer everything felt. Walter pulled me up to dance, spinning me until I was dizzy. Not just from the alcohol. I ended up falling back against George's chest, and for a moment, the three of us stood there breathing heavily, the air thick with unspoken possibilities. Have you ever crossed a line, knowing you shouldn't, but sensing deep down that it was already too late to turn back? That's exactly where this story is headed. That stormy night began innocently enough. Have you ever noticed how the air feels different when you sense something life-altering is about to happen? There I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner while thunder rumbled outside. Our parents were away at a business conference in Chicago, and I'd promised to make my famous pasta for George and Walter. "Need any help?" George's voice startled me as he leaned against the doorframe, his dark eyes tracking my every move. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, warmer. Walter appeared shortly after, rolling up his sleeves. "Can't let you do all the work, sis," he said with a smile, reaching past me for the wine glasses. His arm brushed against mine, and the intimacy of cooking together was almost intoxicating. George chopped vegetables while I stirred the sauce, our elbows touching each time he reached across me. Walter opened a bottle of red wine, pouring 3 glasses. "To family?" he toasted, his eyes holding mine a moment too long over the rim of his glass. Dinner became a dance of exchanged glances and casual touches. Have you ever felt like you were sitting in the calm center of a storm, knowing the peace wouldn't last? Walter cracked jokes that made me laugh too much, while George's intense gaze made my skin tingle. "Movie night?" Walter suggested. We finished the dishes, and my hand shook slightly as I nodded. This was our ritual, but tonight felt unusual. The storm outside had disrupted most channels, leaving us with only our old DVD collection. The living room was enveloped in shadows, lit sporadically by lightning flashes. I settled onto the sofa, acutely aware of George and Walter sitting next to me. The film played, but I couldn't concentrate on the screen. Each thunderclap startled me, and every time their hands reached for mine, offering comfort that felt far from brotherly. "You're cold," George whispered, noticing my shiver. Before I could reply, Walter had already draped a blanket over us. Now, we shared this intimate space, our bodies close under the soft fabric. Have you ever felt like you're standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing one step could alter everything? The movie's dialogue became background noise as the tension built in the room. George's thumb traced gentle circles on my shoulder, while Walter's hand lingered just shy of mine beneath the blanket. The air felt heavy with unspoken words and unacknowledged thoughts. Another rumble of thunder, and the power abruptly went out. The screen went black, plunging us into darkness, punctuated only by the occasional flash of lightning. My heart raced as I felt both brothers shift closer. "Maybe we should light some candles," I suggested, my voice barely audible. "Stay." George's voice was soft, his breath warm against my ear. Walter's hand found mine in the dark, and I felt trapped between them, like a moth drawn to 2 flames. The room seemed charged with a different electricity, one unrelated to the storm outside. "Cynthia," Walter whispered my name like a prayer. In the next flash of lightning, I saw the longing in his eyes, reflected in George's gaze when I turned to him. Have you ever wanted something so badly that it physically hurts to resist? The next moment seemed to stretch endlessly, like thick, sweet honey, full of possibility. George's hand cupped my face, while Walter's fingers interlaced with mine. The line we'd been dancing around for 2 years was suddenly right there, ready to be crossed. Tell me, have you ever been caught in a moment where every choice feels both right and wrong, where your heart and mind are at war, and your body betrays your better judgment? That moment, in the dark, caught between my stepbrothers, would change everything. The storm raged outside, but the real tempest had only just begun in our living room. Sometimes the most perilous storms are the ones that stir within us, waiting to break free. And break free, they did, in that darkness, with only lightning revealing our faces. All the carefully built walls began to crumble. Have you ever experienced a moment when your entire world shifts, when everything you thought you knew about yourself changes in the blink of an eye? "We shouldn't," I whispered, but my actions told a different story as I leaned into George's touch. His fingers traced my jawline, while Walter's hand tightened around mine. The thunder outside drowned out the sound of my frantic heart, but I knew they could feel it. "We've been resisting this for 2 years," Walter murmured, his lips near my ear. George's thumb brushed across my bottom lip, sending shivers down my spine. "Tell us to stop," he challenged softly. "Tell us you don't feel this too." The next flash of lightning captured the intensity in their eyes, reflecting desires I'd tried so hard to deny. Have you ever craved something so much that all reason is swept away? That's how it felt as George's lips finally met mine, soft but demanding, while Walter's hands tangled in my hair. What followed was a blur of sensation and emotion. George pulled back, only for Walter to turn my face towards him, claiming his kiss. My mind screamed that this was wrong, but my body sang that it was right. They alternated, tasting my lips, each kiss different but equally intoxicating. "We've imagined this so many times," George confessed, his breath against my neck, as Walter's fingers traced patterns on my bare shoulder. The room spun with unspoken desires, as hands roamed and breathing became heavier. Each flash of lightning revealed more heated looks and flushed skin. Both of them had their moments, which lasted about 40 minutes. Have you ever found yourself in a moment so overwhelming that time seems to freeze, yet reality always crashes back when you least expect it? A car door slammed outside, headlights sweeping across the windows. We jumped apart as if scorched, the enchantment broken. It wasn't our parents, just the neighbors, but it was enough to break the spell of our intense moment. I stood unsteadily, adjusting my disheveled clothes. "We can't," I managed to say, though my body ached to return to their embrace. The intense desire in their eyes made me recoil. "We're supposed to be family." "Family doesn't feel like this," Walter whispered, reaching for me once more, continuing the kiss. George remained quiet, but his deep, dark eyes expressed volumes of unspoken yearnings. Have you ever had to decide between what your heart longs for and what society deems acceptable, between passion and obligation? Because standing there, staring at my stepbrothers in the stormlit room, I realized we had crossed a line that could never be undone. I rushed upstairs to my room, leaving them in the darkness below. My lips still tingled from their kisses. That night, I stayed awake, listening to the storm, knowing similar restlessness haunted the rooms beside mine. The walls seemed too thin, the house too small to hold the weight of what had occurred between us. Sometimes the strongest desires are the ones we cannot fully act on. That night altered everything. Our relationship, our family dynamics, our understanding of who we were. They say time heals all wounds, but some lessons leave scars that last forever. As I sit here today, years after that stormy night, I've come to understand that the most challenging boundaries to uphold are often the ones closest to home. Our parents never learned the real reason their ideal blended family fell apart. They blamed it on growing up, on natural distance. Sometimes I wonder if that's a gentler explanation than the truth. Have you ever kept a secret that protected others but tore you apart inside? The effect it had on my relationships since then. Let's just say I've developed an almost obsessive need for clear boundaries. Every potential partner has to understand that family is family, and some lines should never be crossed, no matter how powerful the attraction. But here's the real truth I want to share. It's not about the temptation, but about the choices we make when confronted with it. A single moment of weakness can reverberate for years, touching everything and everyone you hold dear. To those of you watching who might be standing on the brink of your own forbidden desire, take a step back. The fleeting pleasure is not worth the lasting cost. Trust once broken leaves cracks that never truly heal. As I conclude this story, I want to ask you one final question. What boundaries will you choose to uphold today to safeguard your tomorrow? Because in the end, that's what this story truly represents. Not the passion, not the forbidden desire, but the wisdom to understand when the price of giving in is simply too great. Thank you for listening to my story. If it helps just one person turn away from their own stormy night of temptation, then sharing it was worth it. Remember, family is precious, trust is invaluable, and some lines once crossed can never be uncrossed. This is Cynthia Gilbert, reminding you that the most important boundaries are often the ones we establish for ourselves.